Phil Steele, welcome back to Tuscaloosa. I hope you're doing well, sir.
I am doing great, Ryan. Always good to talk to you, my friend.
Always good to talk some college football. And I know I watched a while ago, you said this is 10 of 12 nighttime shows, but we're glad that you're able to spend a couple of minutes here in Tuscaloosa talking college football. And, you know, when this magazine hits the newsstands, it's the sign that we're getting a little bit closer to college football, and that makes the people in Tuscaloosa very, very happy.
Yeah, and I'm sure if my magazine is not geared to the casual fan. I think the casual fan walks up to the bookstore, the newsstand, opens up my copy, just is overwhelmed with the amount of information in there, puts it back down, goes gets itself a nice light read, something that it can glance at a few times and throw on a shelf. But if you're a hardcore football fan, once you get your hands on my magazine with the 352 pages, it's like getting 128 media guides rolled into one. Then you have to have this one each and every year. And I generally feel the folks in Alabama are probably among the best college football fans in the country. In fact, when I do my radio shows, Ryan, especially this time of year, so far, I've probably done close to 100 shows this season so far. Number one state, Alabama. I could do shows in Alabama probably all day long, 4 or 5 shows in Alabama each day.
Awesome. Well, I'll never forget a really quick story. I walked over into the Braves locker room with Chipper Jones, a fanatic, college football fanatic. I thought Chipper Jones was not going to let me leave that locker room because I had a Phil Steele, and I was sitting there reading. I was waiting on to interview a player, and I was sitting here reading college football, and he looked over at me because, hey, that's not on the newsstand, is it yet? And I'm like, no, this is a media copy. And I'll never forget. I'm waiting on an interview, and Chipper Jones is over in the locker room borrowing my Phil Steele college football guide, and I'm going, do I really walk back over there and take my guide from Chipper Jones, or do I just walk out of the locker room? I went and got my Phil Steele guide because.
Okay, I was going to ask you what did you do? That's a great story, Ryan. I appreciate you sharing that with me, and I was waiting with bated breath to find out what you actually did in that situation.
No, I did. I went and got it, man. I mean, he's a college football fanatic, but always enjoy breaking down college football with Chipper. But let's talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide. But before we do that, I want to talk about it from your perspective. You've been watching college football for many years. Help us understand from your perspective what Nick Saban has been able to accomplish here and going into his 9th year in Tuscaloosa from your perspective.
It's phenomenal. And you look at the, bottom line, number one recruiting class, 5 straight years. Then just look at the way he develops the players. And this program is on the gold standard right now. And yes, I realize Alabama lost in the playoffs last year, but Alabama's a team that, you can't find a better football program out there. The recruiting's there. The coaching staff is there. The fan base is there. I think Saban's just done a phenomenal job at Alabama.
Let me talk about 2014. Did they, in your opinion, did they overachieve? Did they underachieve? In Tuscaloosa, 12-2 is not a satisfying year. Your thoughts about 2014 before we move on to 2015?
Well, you look at the Mississippi game was a game that, had their chances, ended up losing. But bottom line, number one seed in the playoffs. So, I think the game against Ohio State, the fact they led at the half, it's a game that, they probably could have taken care of business. But let's face it, by Alabama standards, 2 losses is a bad season. I think there's a lot of schools around the country that would take being the number one seed in the playoffs. But for Alabama, if you lose 2 games, it's a tough year.
Let's talk about what you think the Crimson Tide as far as 2015.
Well, I don't see a dominant team in the SEC this year. I do think it's a wide-open race, West, East. I think we're going to have a great SEC title game. But I'm a guy that leads on defense. And, I think a lot of folks around the country, the easiest way to gauge a team is to look at your quarterback, running back, receivers, and what you won your bowl game by and what was your final record last year. But I tend to weight it a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball. And I've got Alabama with the number 1 defensive line in the country, number 3 set of linebackers, number 7 DBs. Overall, my number 1 rated defense. And remember last year, we had a first-year starting quarterback, and Blake Sims did a great job. He had 64%, 28 touchdowns, just 10 interceptions. But keep in mind, he didn't get drafted, didn't sign as an undrafted free agent. I believe he's playing in the CFL. They can replace him with another first-year starter, whether it's Jake Coker, David Cornwell. I think they'll do just fine at the quarterback spot. They've got dynamic running backs with Henry, Drake, and Harris. The offensive line, they need the interior to come together. They've got Kelly at center. They've got Cam Robinson, a left tackle. They need the rest of that offensive line to come together. But I think the receiver is going to be better than anybody's going to give him credit for, because while Amari Cooper was far and away the best wide receiver last year, they didn't really utilize all the other guys. And they've got talent there with Robert Foster, Chris Black, Adarius Stewart, even the guys behind them like Calvin Ridley, the true freshman. I think he can come in and make a big impact this year. So it's a deeper receiving core than you would think. And while the experience isn't there, it will be there by the end of the year, and that's what matters.
When you look at Derrick Henry on the cover of your magazine with some other great players, what type of season, in your opinion, does he need to have for this team to be one of those Final Four teams?
Well, I don't think it all is on Henry's shoulders. I mean, Henry's your big guy. He benches 440 pounds. He's got speed. He can have that big year, and I think he will have a big year. But as we know from Alabama, they like to alternate their backs a little bit, keep them fresh. They've got a breakaway guy, Kenyon Drake, who you could compare to like a Reggie Bush type. And how about the true freshman, Damian Harris, coming in, the number 1 rated running back out of high school, and he's got good size at 205 pounds. So these are all 200-pound guys. I think Henry will get up there in that 1,500-yard range, but I think Drake's going to get some yards, and I think Harris will get some yards.
Let's go to the other team in the state. I looked at a lot of different projections, preseason predictions. You've got Auburn at 14. You can make some friends in Tuscaloosa if you'll explain how Auburn is at 14.
Well, Auburn's going to be a preseason AP top 10 team this year, but I have them at 14 because I do think they drop a couple of games during the season. Now, you look at them on offense, it's Gus Malzahn. He's got Jeremy Johnson, who has experience, and Jeremy Johnson's a better passer than Nick Marshall. He's not the same runner, but he's 6'5", 240, outstanding arm. They've got 3 running backs, Jovan Robinson, Rock Thomas, Kerryon Johnson, all among the top 5 recruits at their positions. I think they're going to have good success there. Duke Williams, top wide receiver for the draft. They've got Kozan, Young, and Coleman, all potential high NFL draft picks on the offensive line. And defensively, I think Will Muschamp looks pretty good because he's got a lot of VHTs, not the same amount Alabama does, but a lot. He's got 8 returning starters, and I think he's going to look pretty smart at the end of the year. It's an Auburn team that's given up over 400 yards per game over the last few years. Now, as I mentioned, I'm a defensive guy, so I look at that defense giving up over 400 yards per game. Do know they'll be improved, but I don't put them up in Alabama standards. They do have to play LSU on the road this year. They have to play Arkansas on the road. They get Alabama at home. But as we know, that game's usually a back-and-forth thing. I think that's going to be a great game to watch. I think Auburn drops a couple of games. That's why I got them at 14.
When you look at Auburn as far as defensive depth, is that the concern that you have for that defensive unit?
Well, they've had the VHTs the last couple of years. They just haven't played up to quite the level you would have expected. Now, granted, the offense does score quickly. They've added a couple of guys, like Blake Countess comes in from Michigan. They do have some guys with starting experience. They've gotten a good set of linebackers. Chris Frost and Casanova McKenzie are both NFL caliber linebackers this year. But I need to see the team play that way on the field. And as much as I'm banking on them being much improved, I'll take Alabama's defense over Auburn's.
Jeremy Johnson, what do you think about this young man at the quarterback position there on the Plains?
Well, he can make every throw that you need to make in the NFL. He's 6'5", he's 240, he's got the arm. He'll give you some mobility. He's not going to run the ball anywhere near what Nick Marshall ran the ball for last year. But Nick Marshall missed some of those open passes down the field. I don't think Jeremy Johnson's going to miss the same passes. He's got enough experience where he's been the backup. He's played in some games. So I think he's going to be one of the SEC's better quarterbacks this year.
We are talking to Phil Steele right now inside the game here in Tuscaloosa. I want to make our way to LSU, a team that was 8-5 last year. A lot of great information here. You like this team to finish second in the SEC West. Why?
Numerous reasons for LSU this year. First of all, coming off that rare year where they had 5 losses last year, let's keep in mind, the last couple of years this team's been inexperienced. So why? They've lost a lot of juniors to the NFL. They've led the NCAA in juniors opting to leave early. This year, 1 junior left early. So they had the fewest amount of NFL losses overall that they've had recently. You look at this team on defense, they've got 7 starters back on the defensive side of the ball, and this may be Miles' fastest defense yet. Last year, they gave up just 317 yards per game. That was even better than Alabama, and now they got 7 starters back on that side. Overall, they have my number 16 rated D-line, number 12 set of linebackers, second best defensive backs in the game. Then you look at them offensively. Yeah, they've got really poor quarterback play recently. But Brandon Harris is a guy who came in, he's 6'3". He'll probably get up closer to 200 pounds this year. But as a true freshman, he got the one big start against Auburn, and he failed. But that's a true freshman making his first start. Now he's got experience under his belt. I think he beats out Anthony Jennings for the starting job. And he's got the arm that can get it there. He's mobile. He can be dynamic. Plus, if you're a defensive coordinator, you can't really focus on Brandon Harris. You need to focus on Leonard Fournette and that running game. You need to focus on the receivers like Trayvon Durrell and Malachi Dupree, and they've got one of the more underrated offensive lines in the country. I think their offense is going to be pretty good with better quarterback play. Then you factor in the schedule. I think they can beat Auburn at home early in the year, get past road tests, some early tough road tests. It would not surprise me at all if this team is 8-0 when they play Alabama on November the 7th, and it could be one of those game of the centuries, which we had just a couple years ago between these two in consecutive years. I'm very high on LSU. In fact, they're my number 2 surprise team in the country, and a surprise team is a team that's not ranked in the top 10 at the start of the year that I think can win the national title. As an example, 2013, Florida State, my number 1 surprise team. They won the national title despite being outside the top 10. And last year, my number 4 surprise team was TCU, coming off a 4-8 season. I said they got a chance of winning the national title. They almost made the playoffs last year.
When you go to the SEC West, and I don't want to talk about each and every team, we focused on the 3 as far as the 1, 2, and 3, but as a whole on the SEC West, when you're making the debate, how much difference is it when you're talking about the strongest division in college football in this side of the conference? How much is it ahead of everybody else when you start looking at divisions?
Well, the next closest division in college football is the Pac-12 South. Last year they finished with 5 teams ranked at the end of the year: USC, UCLA, Arizona State, Arizona, and Utah, all ranked. Here's the difference between the two divisions. The team that I've got pegged, and I believe they'll be 7th in the SEC Media Days as well, for 7th place in the SEC West is Mississippi State. This is a team that was number 1 in the country for 5 straight weeks last year, and they have a legitimate Heisman contender at quarterback in Dak Prescott, yet they're probably going to be picked 7th in the West this year. You look at the Pac-12 South, their 7th place team, yeah, they're improved, but it's Colorado, and it's a Colorado team that was 2-10 last year. So they do not have a weak spot in the West. They've got more legitimate national title contenders than the other guys. The West is the strongest division in college football.
One of the questions that came in via the Twitter account is offensive line. When you look at offensive line of the SEC, who has the best offensive line in the Southeastern Conference?
In the magazine, I made it a 2-way tie. Now, one of them is Arkansas, and if all you have to do is look at these boys get off the bus. I mean, they did not have the biggest offensive line in college football. They had the biggest offensive line in football last year, bigger than any NFL offensive line. They're a massive bunch. They're Bielema's guys. I mean, Bielema promotes these guys like they're stars. They've got 4 starters back. They've got All-American candidates, Sebastian Tritola and Denver Kirkland. They've got Dan Skipper, Mitch Smothers. It's a big old offensive line. They like to run the football. They average 5.1 yards per carry, and they allowed just 14 sacks last year. The other one I'm going to put right up there with them, and I tied them for first in the SEC, is Georgia. And Georgia's offensive line, remember last year they had Todd Gurley, and then Todd Gurley went down, and everybody said, wow, this team's in trouble. They're going to lose to Missouri. Next thing you know, they're whipping Missouri. They averaged 6 yards per carry, 6.0 yards per carry rush. They allowed just 17 sacks last year. And this year, when you look at their line, they've got 4 of their key starters back in Pike, Kublano, Houston, and Theus. They do have to replace their center this year, but they look to be in really good shape. So I've got Georgia and Arkansas tied for the number 1 offensive line in the SEC.
We're talking to Phil Steele right now inside the game here in Tuscaloosa as we continue our college football talk. And if you take Georgia as one of the better offensive lines and Arkansas as well, what a fun matchups that those are going to be when you look at Alabama's defensive line that you've already talked about. I always like to watch the matchups within a matchup. You get the game,
yeah.
but it's that matchup. Who's going to be better? You've got the number 1 offensive line going against the number 1 defensive line. That's going to be a fun matchup when you look at Arkansas and Georgia back-to-back weeks there in October.
Yeah, it sure will. And as you mentioned, I've got Alabama's defensive line rated number 1 in the country. You got men against men in the trenches. That's real football, and that's where I like to watch the game too. I like to watch the game in the trenches because that's where some real football is played.
Let me go to Ohio State for a couple of minutes on the national stage. Is there any way this team slips up and loses a game?
Possibility exists. Here's the 3 games I think they've got the biggest chance of. Virginia Tech is always tough at home at night, and they've got one of Bud Foster's better defenses. Plus, last year they somehow managed to beat Ohio State. Granted, the Ohio State team at the start of the year and the Ohio State team at the end of the year were 2 different teams. Michigan. Now, it's Jim Harbaugh. It's his first year. They don't have the talent of Ohio State, but it is a rivalry game. And I'm going to harken back to 1968. 1968, Ohio State won the national title with the Super Softs. They had Rex Kern, John Brockington, Jim Otis, and it was pretty much a slam dunk. This team will win the next 2 national titles. They had beaten Michigan that year 50-14. It wasn't even close. Well, Michigan went out and got a new coach. It was Bo Schembechler. And Ohio State won all their games, going to Michigan, at Michigan, final game of the year, and Michigan upsets them. In fact, they outplayed them the entire game. I think they beat them something like 24-12. And that ruined the Super Softs the next season. Well, guess what? Ohio State's got the Super Softs from last year. They're pretty much thought to run the table this year. And their final game of the regular season, at Michigan against a first-year head coach, Jim Harbaugh. We'll see how that plays out. And the final one is Michigan State. Now, I'm going to go back to the Big Ten media poll last year, which I'm a member. I vote on it. And we did a vote. Everybody voted Ohio State to win the Big Ten last year. But then Braxton Miller went down. So they offered a revote, and Michigan State was the favorite. And Michigan State figured to hold all the cards. They had a very talented team, and they got Ohio State at home. No way they can lose that, right? Well, Ohio State beat them. This year, Michigan State has got my number 1 rated offensive line in the country and my number 2 rated defensive line in the country. They've got a veteran quarterback in Connor Cook, and they've got my number 10 set of linebackers. So it's a good Michigan State team. The last 3 games in this series have been won by the road team. So as quick as you are to dismiss Ohio State or Michigan State's chances, Ohio State has better beware. I do have Ohio State, however, favored by a touchdown or more in every single game, but those are the 3 games they got to watch out for.
When you look at Ohio State, is it managing personalities? Is it managing personnel is really the biggest challenge to get those guys to believe that they can be beat? Because right now, with all the preseason publications, the projections, it looks like Ohio State's world beaters. Is that Urban Meyer's job, is to manage these personalities and realize, hey, grab a piece of humble pie as you walk by the locker room?
That's the key. I was just talking to one coach whose team was a big favorite in this conference last year, and he said that's the reason that they didn't play well, because everybody came in with a sense of entitlement. But Urban Meyer coaches beyond that. He coaches the entitlement right out of you. He will completely take that out. I think he's the perfect coach to bring this team and keep them focused for the upcoming year and keep away that sense of entitlement. And you got to like his position at the quarterback spot with J.T. Barrett, Cardell Jones, and Braxton Miller. Any one of the 3 could take that team to the playoffs.
Phil, in the final couple of minutes here of our conversation, I want to ask you, walk us through, because I find this fascinating, how you develop this magazine with the process. This is not something you put together in a couple of weeks. Talk about the process that it takes, the hours that you spend in it, writing each and every team preview.
Yeah, and we've already started on the 2016 magazine. We've got the schedules for next year. We started writing some of those angles, but the main meat of the magazine is the team write-ups, the things like that, my power ratings, and I start on that the Sunday after Thanksgiving. So the Sunday after Thanksgiving, I begin work on my 2016 magazine, and I spend 3 to 5 hours on each team. I go through every article that's written about each team during the course of the year. I write the different units. I give it a post write-up. I know the players that are gone pretty much, with the exception of some players leaving early for the NFL or some dismissals, things like that. But I get a real good first write-through on the team, spend 3 to 4 to 5 hours on each team at that point. Then my second write-through is in the start of spring. Now I get updated, any new players leave, any new players come in, figure them into the write-up, update my power ratings, go through the entire write-up once again, spend another 3 to 5 hours catching up on everything that happened since the end of the season and the start of the spring. And then my final one is the post-spring write-up, which is another 3 to 5 hour write-up. And once again, I'm going through everything that happened this spring. I watch every spring game out there, read every article written about a team in the spring, and then finalize my projections for the season. I have a staff of about 15 to 20 people that work on nothing but football year-round, and it finally ends the process at the end of May. So 6 full months Myself, I'm working 80 to 85 hours in that 6-month span. A lot of work goes into the magazine each and every year.
Phil, I'm going to throw it back to you and talk about, for one, the website, but talk about how folks can get in touch with you there on the Twitter account, whether we're talking about ordering the magazine on Google Play, available there. Right now, you can download the edition. We're going to give one copy away throughout this program here in just a couple of minutes, but we'll have a chance to send people to the website and then tell them how they can get their hands on this 2015 college football preview.
Well, I really appreciate that, Ryan. The magazine hits the newsstands July 1st. If you want to head out, and all I ask is you open up a copy, compare it to every other magazine, 3 to 4 times the amount of information in there, and most accurate over the last 17 years. Now, if you don't want to wait for it to hit the newsstands, you can go right to the website, which is philsteele.com. That's STEELE.com. Order it there. If you order today, we ship today. You can call our offices tomorrow at 866-918-7711. That's 866-918-7711. As you mentioned, Ryan, you can actually, if you have an iPad or an iPhone, you can download it right now on iTunes and have it in your hands in the next 10 minutes. If you have an Android device, you can get it through Google Play, once again, in the next 10 minutes. And you can also follow me on Twitter. That is at Phil Steele 042. I try to put a lot of interesting stuff up there during the course of the day. It is at Phil Steele 042.